Pastor Dick Stadler, and I'm here again with Ann Carter and with Tim Carter, and we're talking Sunday readings. And we're talking the Sunday readings now for Easter coming up this coming Sunday. May God give you a blessed and celebration of the Lord's resurrection and his power and his victory over death. We're going to be looking at an Old Testament lesson from Isaiah 65, verses 17 to 25. Then we're going to look at an epistle reading from Luke, from 1 Corinthians 15, the great resurrection chapter that Paul writes. And then we're going to conclude our discussion with the gospel of Easter according to Luke chapter 24, verses 1 to 12.
A reading from Isaiah. See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more. Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child. The one who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. They will not labor in vain, nor will they bear children doomed to misfortune, for they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox, and dust will be the serpent's food. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord.
So as we turn our attention to Isaiah 65, it's just a wonderful, surprising picture of what life will be like in the restored new world that the Messiah will create. And I'm just wondering, are there any questions that you think that people will have as they listen to this reading from Isaiah chapter 65?
Well, I don't know if anybody else will have this question, but I find it interesting to know the context in which these, especially these Isaiah readings, come from. Who is he speaking to, and what is happening in the world that they needed to hear this at this time, and what was going on exactly that this passage was, where did this come from? Basically, is the question.
Well, it's the end of the book. We got chapter 65 and we've got chapter 66, and then the book is over. And the book is long, and it's thematic of talking about the fall of the children of Israel, the punishment that is being inflicted, the salvation that is going to come, and the rejoicing that will take place. It's a reminder. Again, this is what is going to happen now, but it's also what's going to happen later. And it's beautiful for Easter Sunday because of the Redeemer, the suffering servant that is identified in earlier in the book of Isaiah. He has accomplished his purpose. He has been raised, and now it's new creation. Chapter 65 talks about judgment and salvation, then new heavens and new earth. That's this section. And then chapter 66 talks about judgment and hope, that what we anticipate while it isn't here yet, we know will happen because God said so.
And the new world that he describes is dramatically different from the world that all of us have lived in, the fallen, imperfect, sinful world. Now, let me just tick off some of the things that people can listen for. In verse 25, wolf and lamb will graze together. You don't have that happen now. They shall not hurt or destroy in my holy mountain, verse 25. I create a new heavens and a new earth, verse 17. Former things shall not be remembered, verse 17. So the old pains and the old sufferings are not going to be part of the new world consciousness. Infant mortality will be non-existent in verse 20. They shall not plant and another eat of it. In other words, there won't be stealing or exploitation, verse 22. And finally, in verse 23, they shall not bear children for calamity. So this is chock full of hope and a promise of restoration in a world that we cannot maybe conceive of, because we're locked in and conditioned by all the things of a fallen, sinful world. So people can look for these things as they listen to this chapter.
Reading from 1 Corinthians. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive, but each in turn. Christ the first fruits, then, when he comes, those who belong to him. Then the end will come, when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, after he has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death.
Then let's move on to the Great Resurrection chapter. We're only going to be reading verses 19 to 26. But Easter is all about resurrection. And that's why I'm sure this was chosen by the church fathers who put together the lectionaries. And it simply reminds us that Christ has been raised from the dead. He's the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And fallen asleep is another way of saying who have died. And so his resurrection is totally different. We've talked about this in past conversations. His is totally different from the other resurrections that he raised people back to life and that were done in the Old Testament, because those people we think pretty much had to die again. Okay, he will never die again. That's what, and everyone he raises from the dead will never die again. And so that's what's embodied in this wonderful picture of first fruits. Any questions that you may have on this or thoughts in addition to that?
Well, this, maybe I've got just reading this incorrectly, but the last three verses say, in my translation, they say, then the end will come when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, after he has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Which I thought, maybe I'm misremembering or this is simplistic, but I thought that he destroyed death when he was resurrected. Does this mean that he has already put all his enemies under his feet? Has he destroyed all dominion and power and authority? That doesn't, is this something that's going to come? Because it says the end, then the end will come. Mm-hmm. So did he destroy death when he was resurrected, or is that something else? Like maybe it's just the then death will come that's throwing my timeline off. But anything you have, any insights you have about the last three verses and the conclusion we have to draw about death here would be really helpful.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Well, I think that the powers and the principalities are still ruling. Mm-hmm. Because we look all around us and we see that people are not living according to God's principles. But the only power that they had over people was that they could kill them, and then those people would be lost. Well, Jesus took care of that. Jesus died, and now when we die, which we still will, we're not lost. God has us in his hand. So the greatest weapon that these principalities and powers, which they still wield, because lots and lots of people have died over the last centuries. But underneath all of that, underneath their power and their control and their attempt to shove down humanity, there's this mustard seed that is growing of acknowledgement that Jesus has already defeated them, and they are on their last legs, so to speak. It's a hard concept, and I don't think I still have it. N.T. Wright speaks about when Jesus was on the cross, he absorbed all the worst that those powers could offer. He absorbed it into his body, and then when he died, all of that died with him. And while they're still on their last legs and they can cause a lot of damage, they truly are so weakened that they can never come back from it. And that's a great promise when we feel that that God isn't in control, that God isn't in charge of everything that's going on. He already dealt with it. And when we live with him, we are able to see through the lies. And then we are able to live with that hope that when we die, we will be with him, because he was the first fruits. And again, we follow after him and we become. And then the end is when Jesus finally says, you guys, I've had it. I've given you choice after opportunity after opportunity, and now it's done. And now my new creation and my new heaven and new earth is going to happen, and then it's it.
And the Apostle Paul is quoting from Psalm 110:1 when he says, he has put all his enemies under his feet. And that's a messianic psalm that predicts what Messiah will do. And there's a difference between defeating death and destroying death. And that's why the word that's used here in the New Testament is kind of interesting, because it means to literally cause to cease to happen. Now, even though Jesus defeated death, and death is as good as gone when he returns and raises up all the dead, it still happens, but it will cease to happen when he comes back for his return and for setting up Judgment Day, because then there will be no more death. And that's why in heaven, there will be no sin. And when we are taken to heaven, we will not have to worry about lying, cheating, gossiping neighbors, or ourselves even doing that, because that will not be part of our nature. We will be transformed into people who are sinless and holy like God. And there will be no prospect of death or disease or suffering either. And so I think that word really helps us understand the question that you legitimately have, and that is, what is the difference here? I thought death was defeated. He was defeated by his resurrection, and that sends a signal, and there's a shock wave going through the world of dominions and powers. And those words are used by Paul and by the New Testament to refer to the evil authorities and evil powers. And so this is maybe the illusion that Paul is making here, and he's saying they're done for, okay? But they are still allowed in God's wisdom to function until the return of Christ. And they may give you the illusion that they're in control, but they're not. God is still in control of everything. Any other thoughts on that particular text before we go to the wonderful gospel lesson of the resurrection of Jesus?
The Holy Gospel according to Luke. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened.
I like Luke's gospel because he puts in certain details that we don't find in some of the others. When it talks about the two angels that appear to the women, and describes them as two men standing in dazzling apparel. It doesn't say that they had wings, it doesn't say they had halos. It just simply says they look like two guys, and they asked the ladies why they're there. They remembered his words, and that's a great tribute to the ladies, that they remembered the words of Jesus. And so there's some compliments that are woven into this text. And when they tell the men, their words seem like wives' tales or like an idle tale. And so they are given the privilege of being the first speakers of the Easter gospel, and the men don't believe them. And then when Peter has to go running to the tomb, he comes away and he's still not sure himself what he's supposed to know. And the text doesn't say he believes that Jesus has arisen. That may have to wait until Jesus appears to him personally, but he goes away shaking his head. So does that raise some other questions they think people will have as they listen to this text?
Well, maybe not specifically about that. I had a couple of questions. My version just says that the women took spices that they had prepared and went to the tomb. Spices always seem called to my mind a spice rack in the kitchen. And so I'm thinking, I think of parsley and oregano and cumin and all that, but that's not what they're bringing here. Do we know kind of what would they have brought? What kinds of items would they have been going to prepare him with? What was sort of the preparations for the dead? Do we know any of that? And then the other question is the women here are named. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and Mary Magdalene, recognize that one. I don't recognize the other two. There are a ton of Marys. And who is Joanna? Do we know who these three are, and what do we know about them? So yeah, if there's any insights or anything you know about how they would have prepared, or about who these three were, I would love to hear it. That's where my mind went when I read this again.
Okay, I'll jump in. We know that there were different burial practices based upon your economic level. We know that you were to be buried the same day that you died. We know that the son of the widow of Nain, he appears to just have been wrapped up in a cloth, and they were taking him out to bury him. We know that Lazarus was in the grave, was in the tomb for 3 days, and Martha said, he's going to be stinking, Lord, so we shouldn't open up the tomb. But the wealthier you got, the more they could use spices to preserve you. And we find out from the book of John that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea came with linen cloths and then with 75 pounds of myrrh. And myrrh was a sticky substance that was mixed with aloes, and aloes is I want to say bark, but it was a wooden fragrant thing that was broken down into dust, and then they would mix that with the myrrh, and then they would put it on the body and then wrap them up so then you didn't stink. But what was interesting, I find interesting, is that Jesus would have been stuck in there like a cocoon. And so doubly then that he got out of it, that he wasn't dead, but somehow he got loosed from his clothing. Why the ladies thought they needed to bring more spices, I don't know. 75 pounds is a lot and it's expensive, but perhaps they just felt they wanted to pay homage to Jesus by bringing what they could. I don't know that any of them had the wealth that Nicodemus had. But I'll turn it over to you, Dick, before we really talk to the women and who they were about burial practices.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add to the spices discussion, because it's just the text is simply not specific enough to tell us what. And so I appreciate your background reading that has revealed that. And we do know that when they discussed the appearance of a dead person, they assumed that by the third day, the person was almost unrecognizable because they did not embalm, they did not do those things to preserve a person's appearance. And that's why when Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, there's the suspicion that, that maybe they didn't have the means to wrap him in spices and that he's going to smell. And that's what Martha says it to Jesus, you know. And so who the women are, I'll let you take a first crack at that.
Well, to know who they were, we can find out to begin by going back to Luke 8, verse 2. The 12 were with him, Jesus, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary Magdalene, which means that she was from the town of Magdala, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their means. Now, as we go further into the narrative of those first chapters in Luke, chapter 9, the rest of 8 and 9, Jesus sends out the 12, and we have the feeding of the 5,000. And then we have Peter's confession, you are the Christ. And then Jesus then says, you know what, guys, I'm going to Jerusalem and they're going to kill me. And I'm going to be put in a tomb, and 3 days later, I'm going to come back to life. So when the angel says to these women who were with Jesus in Nazareth, and he says, remember what he told you in Nazareth, they do. They have been with Jesus since the beginning, and they have been witnesses to everything that Jesus has done, and now they are the witnesses to the resurrection. Joanna is very interesting. She was married to Chuza, who was Nabatean. Herod was married to a Nabatean before all of his divorce and everything that went on with John the Baptist. But he was manager. So Joanna would have lost social status by leaving that world of Herod Antipas and coming in and following Jesus. She probably would have had her own funds that she could have used to help Jesus. There's some speculation that she takes a Latin name, Junia, and that she is recognized by Paul at the end of his letter to Romans. We don't know much more about her, except that she, as Balcom says, Easter witness conferred authority in the church. And these women who were named, and they're different in all of the Gospels. There are always at least 2 who are witnesses, and that goes according to Hebrew law, that there should be 2 or 3 witnesses to corroborate the truth of an event. And these women, they're different women. The main ones, of course, are Mary Magdalene, are Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, are, let's see, Salome, Joanna, and Mary of Clopas. Those are the named women at the tomb. They witness the crucifixion, they witnessed the burial, and they witnessed the empty tomb. So they knew that he died, they knew where he was buried, and they knew that he came back to life. And the disciples had all fled, but these women watched him die, and then they knew that he had come back to life.
When it comes to identifying James of Mary, son of Mary, we may get a hint from the list of the apostles that lists 2 Jameses. The one James we know was the son of Zebedee, whose wife was Salome. So there was another James of Alphaeus. And so maybe now we're learning incidentally that his mother's name was Mary. And so that may be who's being referred to there among those women. But as Anne indicated, you put all 4 of the Gospels together and you get quite a choir of women's voices who are being summoned into the service of the resurrected Lord to announce his resurrection and his victory over death. Mm-hmm. So it's really amazing.
Yeah. And you asked Tim, why were they named and why wasn't anybody else? Speculation is that a letter was written out and these people were still alive and they were named. And if you have any doubts about it, ask them. And the early Christian church would have known who these women and who these men were. And they could have gone directly to the source And then the source could have said, yeah, I was there. I was there. I saw it all.
Now, we're pretty sure that at this time there was a Jewish tradition that did not trust the witness of women in courts of law any more than they did the witness of shepherds. And this is a startling thing, that the Gospels all attribute to the women the authority to be a witness of the resurrection of Jesus. And I would love to be able to ask the disciples and the people who were alive at this time, was that a shocker to your culture when people heard that the women had testified to the appearance of Jesus before the men had a chance to see him? Was that a big surprise? I suspect it was, from what I've been able to glean from an understanding of the culture of Jesus' day. So this was a kind of a new thing that we've been talking about, the new thing of the kingdom. Here's something else, that both men and women's witness is precious and valuable to the Lord. And we'll see that going forward now in the book of Acts, where both men and women are used in order to get the word of Jesus out.
Mhm.
Anything else on those texts as people get ready to celebrate the Easter resurrection of Jesus? So I want to thank all of you for eavesdropping on our conversation today. Please hit the like button. It helps us to get a little more attention on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button and you'll get notifications when the next video comes out. But thank you very much for being with us, and may God not only pour his blessings into your life, but use you to be a blessing to others. Shalom.
Hey.